One day, excuse me, I'll let you talk. One day,
Anyway.
yeah, okay.
Kinley to court to prove to him and his wife that he fathered your 6-month-old son, Legend. You say his wife is petty, and she is the cause of his paternity denials. Kinley, you admit that Miss Thompson was an affair gone wrong, needs to leave you and your wife of 17 years alone to find her baby's father. Is that
Yes,
correct?
Your Honor.
How did you end up in a relationship with a married man?
Okay, I ended up in a relationship with Terrell, and I wouldn't consider it a relationship. I would consider it friends with benefits. He was always liking my pictures. He was commenting on my pictures. He was always trying to get attention. Anyway, one day, I finally gave him a chance because he was real thirsty, and I gave him a chance because I was like, okay, I want to go out on a date. Because like I said, I'm 25, and I'm just trying to tell you the story because you asked me. So I chose him to go out with, obviously because he was always giving me nice notes because
Sometimes the DNA test that was supposed to bring peace only opens the door to pain. In Judge Lauren Lake's courtroom, the truth doesn't whisper, it explodes. Because when it comes to paternity, betrayal, and the pursuit of justice, one thing remains constant. The truth changes everything. It begins like so many stories do, two people meeting by chance. Swept into a relationship that wasn't meant to last. She thought she found love. He thought he found escape. But 6 months later, a baby was born, and the questions began. A young mother stood in front of Judge Lauren Lake, trembling not from fear, but from exhaustion, the kind that only comes from carrying both a child and the weight of truth alone. Across from her stood the man she said was the father, denying it with every ounce of pride he had left. That day, the DNA test wasn't just a medical document. It was a verdict waiting to shatter someone's illusion. In this episode, inspired by Paternity Court, we explore how lives are rearranged by truth. In a world where people regret taking the very test that was supposed to save them, Judge Lauren Lake reminds us that no matter how painful, the truth is always the first step toward healing. As the podcast microphones and courtroom cameras roll, the audience witnesses something raw, the battle between shame and accountability, the thin line between law and justice, and the undeniable relationship between emotion and evidence. Lauren Lake, with her calm but commanding presence, doesn't just preside over cases. She becomes the voice of reason amid emotional chaos. She knows that sometimes the hardest part of justice isn't the verdict, it's the acceptance. Behind every swab, every DNA test, and every trembling voice, there's a life waiting to be rebuilt. In one case, a woman named Miss Thompson stood alone, defending her truth. She spoke of being misled, of a relationship that blurred the lines between affection and deception. Her story echoed through countless homes watching and listening. A story that reminded us why. The Game-Changing Attorney podcast often explores how truth in one arena, law, can redefine our entire sense of morality. The truth, after all, is never sterile. It carries fingerprints, tears, and memories. When Judge Lauren Lake asked the questions, it wasn't just procedure. It was a dissection of human motives. What drives someone to deny their child? What leads another to fight for acknowledgement when all they face is doubt? These questions aren't new. They lie at the very heart of the concept of justice in jurisprudence. Justice isn't just about facts. It's about perception. It's about the unspoken tension between moral truth and legal proof. It's why Judge Lauren Lake often says that evidence doesn't always tell the whole story, but it tells enough to start healing. And in the evidence stage in divorce cases, these DNA results become something much larger. They become emotional wrecking balls. They can determine child support, reshape families, and redefine trust itself. It's the kind of story that could easily fit within the Divorce Course podcast, a place where real-life separations and emotional reckonings remind listeners that love, law, and loss often share the same table. But beyond the surface, this episode dives deeper into the moral anatomy of truth. Judge Lauren Lake becomes more than a legal figure. She becomes a guide through the labyrinth of human frailty. Her courtroom isn't just about paternity. It's about forgiveness, accountability, and transformation. Because the truth doesn't destroy, it reveals. And once it's revealed, people have a choice to rebuild or to run. In another courtroom, under different laws, the Adverse Inference in Evidence Act might be invoked, a principle that allows the court to infer guilt when one hides or withholds evidence. But here in paternity court, the evidence hides in plain sight. The curve of a baby's smile, the resemblance in eyes, the ache of uncertainty that only a DNA test can end. For the mothers, the test is a cry for validation. For the fathers, it's a test of courage. And for Judge Lauren Lake, it's the ultimate intersection of justice and empathy. When people watch these stories or listen to them later on celebrate recovery testimonies or podcasts about healing, they often say the same thing. I could never go through that. But truth has a way of finding everyone. Whether it's in a courtroom, a therapy room, or the quiet space between two broken people, it demands to be faced. The first story, like many others, ends with a revelation. The man is confirmed to be the father. But that's not the real ending. The real ending begins after the camera cuts, when the participants walk out into the sunlight, carrying the truth that will change every part of their future. Lauren Lake doesn't celebrate the verdicts. She celebrates recovery. Not the kind that's easy or public, but the slow kind. The one where people start forgiving themselves for what they did when they didn't know better. She often says, the truth will set you free, but not before it makes you miserable. And that's what makes her courtroom feel sacred, because law can decide who pays child support, but justice decides who heals. In another case, another episode, the same theme repeats in new form. A man denies fatherhood, citing timelines and suspicion. A woman defends herself with hospital records, her trembling hands clutching evidence like it's her last breath of credibility. The audience watches, the tension builds, and again the swabs decide what the heart cannot. But in truth, it's not about biology, it's about belonging. This is why podcasts like The Game-Changing Attorney often draw parallels between courtroom justice and personal redemption. Because in both, the victory isn't in proving someone wrong, it's in proving yourself honest. Judge Lauren Lake stands as that bridge between the Supreme Court's cold logic and the human warmth that law so often forgets. She reminds everyone that behind every statute and every code lies a heartbeat, and that's what makes her version of justice revolutionary. These DNA test cheating stories aren't just gossip, they are modern morality tales. Each one examines how deception, regret, and love collide under the fluorescent lights of truth. Each one asks a haunting question. When we search for proof, are we ready for the answer? Because sometimes people regret taking the test. Not because it was wrong, but because it was right. And that's where the transformation begins. When the cameras stop rolling and the lights fade from the courtroom, what remains is silence. The kind of silence that weighs more than words. It's in that silence that Judge Lauren Lake's lessons begin to take root. Not just in the lives of those who stand before her, but in all who watch, listen, and reflect. Because truth, once spoken, has a ripple effect that doesn't end with a verdict. It continues across dinner tables, through families, and deep into the relationship between law and justice. The DNA test that once seemed like a technicality becomes a mirror, forcing people to face who they were when they made their choices. And as Judge Lauren Lake often says, you can't rewrite what happened, but you can redefine what it means. The beauty of her courtroom lies not in punishment, but in revelation. Each story becomes an anatomy of consequence, a live demonstration of how the truth, though painful, can purify. One of the most striking elements in her cases is how regret transforms into responsibility. A mother who once shouted in anger begins to cry not from defeat, but from relief. A father who once denied paternity finds redemption in the moment he says, "That's my child." It's this emotional unraveling that echoes beyond paternity court, into podcasts like the Divorce Course podcast, where couples dissect the ruins of their marriages, or celebrate recovery testimonies where people find healing in their most broken truths. Because ultimately, what connects all of these spaces, courtrooms, podcasts, and therapy circles, is a shared human craving for clarity. The truth changes everything because it refuses to leave anything untouched. Imagine standing before Judge Lauren Lake, knowing that a simple test could undo years of secrets. The DNA test, cold, precise, undeniable, becomes the final judge. Some call it science, others call it fate, but in her courtroom, it becomes justice incarnate. It's in these moments that law and empathy collide. She balances both like twin scales, one heavy with legal precedent, the other with human pain. It's this balance that makes her courtroom so distinct from the rigid traditions of the Supreme Court. While the higher courts deliberate on law, Lauren Lake deliberates on life. Her rulings may not make headlines in legal journals, but they echo across the hearts of millions who've known betrayal, doubt, or abandonment. Every episode becomes a case study in the concept of justice and jurisprudence. But what is justice really? Is it about proof or about peace? Is it about who wins or about who learns? Judge Lauren Lake's philosophy answers quietly. Justice isn't about the end. It's about the beginning that follows. Because when truth enters a room, it doesn't just decide, it transforms. This transformation is most evident when the parties in her courtroom experience what psychologists call the truth release. It's that moment when a long-denied fact is finally accepted, and both anger and relief coexist in the same breath. It's also the point where the Game-Changing Attorney podcast often draws lessons about leadership, honesty, and redemption. How facing reality is not just a legal act, but a moral one. But not all truths bring closure. Some open new wounds. In the story of the young man who discovered he wasn't the father, the courtroom became a sanctuary for heartbreak. The DNA test results arrived with the usual ceremony, the sealed envelope, the steady tone, the breathless anticipation, and then, "You are not the father." Silence, shock, tears. Judge Lauren Lake didn't celebrate. She consoled. She reminded the man that love doesn't disappear just because biology says otherwise. She told him that being a father is not always written in blood. It's written in action. This is where her courtroom transcends traditional law. It becomes a stage for human truth, guided by moral intelligence and emotional literacy. She told the mother, "This is not about shame. It's about understanding, because even when science speaks, your story doesn't end, it evolves." Those words reflect a broader principle found in both the evidence stage in divorce cases and the adverse inference in evidence act. When you hide from truth, you don't destroy it, you only delay it. The truth will wait patiently until the day you can no longer pretend. Every mother who walks into that courtroom carries a story of hope. Every man who stands there bears the weight of pride and fear. And every test reveals how fragile trust can be when built on secrecy. These aren't just DNA test cheating stories. They're social parables. They remind us how easily human judgment is clouded by emotion, and how clarity, though painful, is sacred. Judge Lauren Lake has said in interviews that she doesn't view these cases as tabloid entertainment. To her, each episode is a public classroom, a place where families, spectators, and even the legal system can learn what real accountability looks like. And that is where her legacy will endure. Across the nation, podcasts and legal analysts refer to her work when discussing how emotional justice complements judicial fairness. The Game-Changing Attorney podcast, for instance, often highlights how attorneys must balance their duty to the law with empathy toward clients, mirroring what Lauren Lake practices daily. In one segment, a guest on that podcast reflected, "The relationship between law and justice isn't always equal, but people like Judge Lake remind us it should at least be humane." This is what makes her different. She doesn't reduce people to evidence. She lets evidence reveal the people they've been hiding from themselves. Even in cases where the Supreme Court might see only statute and precedent, Lauren Lake sees pain and potential. She embodies a modern version of jurisprudence, one where compassion is not weakness but wisdom. Her voice becomes both gavel and guidance, reminding us that truth, no matter how cold, is the only light worth following. The courtroom stories often weave into broader discussions about family law, especially child support and adoption stories. There are episodes where adopted children seek their birth parents, armed with DNA kits and hope. Their journeys reflect the same theme, the quest for identity. These adoption stories' full episodes reveal that bloodlines may separate, but love has the power to reunite. Each revelation, each truth found through DNA expands the definition of family. Some people regret taking the test, not because of what they lost, but because of what they learned. Because knowing the truth means you can no longer hide from it. In modern jurisprudence, this emotional complexity is often overlooked, but Judge Lauren Lake's courtroom humanizes it. She doesn't just interpret law, she interprets life. When a father cries after discovering a child is not his, she doesn't move quickly to the next case. She gives silence its sacred place. She tells him, "Grieve the truth, but don't despise it." That is the art of restorative justice, where truth isn't just a weapon, but a path to redemption. Her courtroom might not bear the grandeur of marble columns or the authority of Supreme Court justices, yet it holds something rarer: grace. And grace in the world of law is revolutionary, because while the Adverse Inference in Evidence Act can compel disclosure, it can't compel empathy. While a divorce case may divide assets, it can't divide guilt evenly. That's where Judge Lauren Lake's courtroom becomes an emotional sanctuary. It bridges the gap between legal correctness and moral truth. In every episode, whether the test confirms or denies paternity, what the audience really witnesses is human beings confronting themselves. It's a reflection of how every society wrestles with its own truths, whether in the family, the community, or the justice system itself. Even the language she uses matters. She never says, "You lost." She says, "Now you know." And that difference changes everything, because knowing is power. Knowing is closure. Knowing is the first step toward recovery. That's why so many who once stood broken before her later appear on Celebrate Recovery Testimonies or the Divorce Course podcast, speaking of how the moment they learned the truth became the moment they began to heal. It's not about exposure, it's about evolution. In one reflection, a legal scholar compared Lauren Lake's approach to therapeutic jurisprudence, a philosophy that sees law as a tool for psychological and emotional growth. In this light, her courtroom becomes a form of collective therapy, blending legal order with human understanding. Each decision becomes not just a ruling, but a lesson. That justice without compassion is sterile. That law without love becomes tyranny. And that truth, no matter how unwelcome, remains the greatest liberator of all. As the episode nears its emotional crescendo, Judge Lauren Lake reminds the participants and the viewers that the journey doesn't end at revelation. It begins there. The truth doesn't just close a chapter, it opens a new one. One written not in secrecy, but in strength. Her courtroom is proof that even in the rawest chaos, order can emerge. That even in pain, there can be peace. And as the episode fades, her words linger like an echo. Truth hurts, but lies destroy. Always choose the hurt that heals. The courtroom falls silent as Judge Lauren Lake closes the envelope and reads the results aloud. Her voice, calm yet commanding, slices through the tension like a blade of truth. Every breath held, every tear restrained, every hope suspended, and then the words that alter lives forever. For some, the DNA test brings closure. For others, it dismantles their world. But for Lauren Lake, it's never just about who is the father. It's about who becomes one after the truth is known. Because justice, in its purest form, is not only about punishment. It's about purpose. And that is the heartbeat of her courtroom, the place where truth changes everything. In today's world, truth often feels negotiable. On social media, in relationships, even in courtrooms, perception sometimes outweighs reality. But not in Judge Lauren Lake's courtroom. Here, evidence speaks louder than ego. Every swab of DNA becomes a silent witness, a drop of science holding centuries of human emotion. As she presides, Lauren Lake is more than a judge. She is an interpreter of the unspoken. Her questions cut through defensiveness. Her empathy disarms pride, and her insight often uncovers what the law alone cannot see. That's why her courtroom has become a modern sanctuary for millions, where people can confront the shadows they've been hiding from. It's not just a show, it's a mirror to society, and as her cases unfold, they reveal not only the relationship between law and justice, but the fragile bond between truth and forgiveness. In one unforgettable episode, after a painful revelation, the mother sobbed uncontrollably, not because she lost, but because she finally stopped pretending. Judge Lauren Lake looked at her and said softly, "The truth didn't break you, it freed you." That moment captured everything her courtroom stands for. It's what podcasts like Celebrate Recovery Testimonies echo week after week. That healing begins where denial ends. The courage to face one's mistakes is the first real victory. This isn't just legal theatre. It's a public workshop on accountability, integrity, and human frailty, and within it, Judge Lauren Lake bridges two worlds, the world of the courtroom and the world of the soul. It's no wonder why shows like the Divorce Course podcast often draw parallels between her approach and the process of reconciliation in broken relationships. Because whether it's a divorce hearing or a paternity test, the essence remains the same. Truth must be confronted before trust can be rebuilt. In these stories, we see how law is not just about evidence, but emotion. It's about the human condition, messy, raw, and unfiltered. This is also why the Game-Changing Attorney podcast often invokes the idea that law, at its best, should transform lives, not merely regulate them. Attorneys, like judges, are storytellers of truth, translators of pain into progress. Judge Lauren Lake embodies that ideal. She knows that justice without empathy is mechanical, and empathy without truth is blind. So she practices both. When we look deeper, these DNA test cheating stories aren't merely about infidelity or scandal. They are philosophical lessons in human behavior. They show how truth operates like gravity, invisible, constant, and inescapable. You can delay it, deny it, or disguise it. But eventually, truth pulls everything back into balance, and sometimes balance looks like heartbreak. Because when people regret taking the test, what they really regret is losing the illusion that once made them feel safe. The illusion of certainty, the illusion of innocence, the illusion of control. But illusions never last. Truth does. Across legal philosophy, the concept of justice and jurisprudence has always revolved around one paradox. Can truth and mercy coexist? In Judge Lauren Lake's courtroom, the answer is yes. She proves that compassion doesn't weaken justice. It completes it. When she speaks to a sobbing mother or a defensive father, she does not just enforce rules, she reminds them of their humanity. She becomes a conduit through which the law learns to listen. Her compassion is not soft, it's structured. It's the kind that tells people the truth they need to hear, not the one they want to hear. This blend of empathy and order makes her one of the most transformative figures in televised justice, a modern embodiment of therapeutic jurisprudence in action. Outside the courtroom, millions tune into podcasts and replays not just for entertainment, but for education. Listeners of the Game-Changing Attorney podcast discuss her rulings as case studies in moral reasoning. On Celebrate Recovery Testimonies, participants recall how watching her courtroom helped them find courage to face their own secrets. The ripple effect of her approach is real. It transcends television. In another powerful story, a young man raised without a father stood before Judge Lauren Lake, seeking answers after 2 decades of uncertainty. The DNA test results revealed that none of the 6 potential fathers were biologically related to him. The room fell silent. His mother wept. The young man stared at the ground, lost in disbelief. And then Judge Lake did something remarkable. She reached across the bench, looked directly into his eyes and said, "You are not defined by the absence of others. You are defined by the strength within you." That line, simple yet profound, has since become one of the most replayed and quoted moments in paternity court history. It speaks to the essence of what she represents. That justice is not about humiliation. It's about restoration. Episodes like that challenge our understanding of law itself. They force us to ask, what is evidence without empathy? What is truth without context? What is justice without love? These questions form the moral architecture of Judge Lauren Lake's court. And it's why scholars sometimes compare her approach to the great moral debates found in the Supreme Court, where justice seeks not only to punish wrongdoing, but to uphold humanity. But where the Supreme Court writes opinions in stone, Lauren Lake writes hers in hearts. Her court is where child support isn't just about financial responsibility, but emotional accountability. Where adoption stories remind us that family is not defined by DNA, but by devotion. Where every verdict, even the painful ones, offers the possibility of redemption. In that way, her work is not unlike the Ministry of Recovery and Testimony found in Celebrate Recovery. She gives people the one thing law books cannot provide: permission to start over. That's what makes her courtroom a living paradox, a place where justice